and we'll get right into it. So here we are. This is a picture, a caricature of who's running. And the caricature of who's running is from the Ma'ariv Daily, and it's from about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And as you can see, it's got a number of men and one woman, and it also has the names of the parties underneath. Now, those of you that look quite carefully will see that there are some pictures that are missing and some names of parties that exist that don't have people leading them. And so this is the announcement that was sent out. And as you can see, it's designed in such a way to show that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is in front, and then it expands in the traditional direction of right wing, left wing, with more traditional Jewish orthodoxy on one side of the right wing, and the Arab Party listed on the far left wing. Now, the reason I mention it that way is because what's happened in this election is that all kinds of divisions have evolved and all kinds of unifications have taken place. And very quickly, if we just go right to left from what you see on this diagram, on this picture, you'll see that the first person on the back, it's the United Torah Judaism Party, ultra-Orthodox Party, Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox Party. The person that you see there is Yaakov Litzman, who was the previous leader, but every election they swap leaders. So it's now Gafni. The next is Shas, which is the Sephardi ultra-Orthodox Party. Ironically, the next party that you see next to him is Avigdor Lieberman, Yisrael Beitenu, because whoever put this together saw him almost next to Deri and Shas on the right-left spectrum, which he's not, and especially on the religious spectrum, he should be way on the other side. The next is Naftali Bennett, who's the leader of Yamina. Yamina is a mixed secular Orthodox party, but rooted far on the right. Yamina means right. The next is Gidon Sa'ar, who left the Likud and started his own party named Tikva Chadasha, New Hope. He was someone who was supposed to be way up there on the Likud list, but for the past few elections, he's been pushed aside. And finally, he decided he was going to start his own party. The next is Benjamin Netanyahu from the Likud party. The next is Yesh Atid, which is Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid, now known as the head of the opposition. He's been in Knesset since 2013, and the Yesh Atid party has become one of the strong mainstays of Israeli politics. We'll get back to that a little later. Next is Benny Gantz of Kachol Lavan. One might argue that Yesh Atid should be a bit further to the left of Kachol Lavan or vice versa, but that's not really that clear. Next, interestingly enough, they put Nitzan Horowitz from Meretz, although Meretz is supposed to be to the left of Labor Avodah, but Labor Avodah is seen by many as being a duplicate of Meretz in many ways. And so Avodah was put to the left of Meretz, and then Ayman Oda of the United Arab List or the Joint Arab List. And then you can see who's missing. If you look at the bottom, you'll see Ra'am. Ra'am is an independent Arab party, and go a few parties in, you'll see religious Zionists, which are fourth from the left. That's led by Smotrich. A bit confusing, and I did it this way to be confusing, and let's go to the next slide. And there you can see Smotrich. Smotrich is the leader of the religious Zionist party. Now, Smotrich went together with Naftali Bennett of Yamina, that you can see right there, but he split from Naftali Bennett for a number of reasons. One, if you look at the national religious picture, you'll see that even within the national religious Zionist framework, there are a number of different gradations, and we'll get to that a little later. The big difference between Naftali Bennett that you see here and Bezalel Smotrich is that Smotrich is saying in these elections, it's important to keep the ideological trend going. And Naftali Bennett is saying ideology is important, but now there are national concerns to be fought. But that's gotten him into some trouble because he has to prove to his electorate that he also does have ideological concerns. Another party that doesn't appear is the Economic Party by Yaron Zalika. I popped him up here between Kachol Lavan and Meretz. Probably he should be a bit further over between Yesh Atid and Kachol Lavan. He's a former general accountant of the Ministry of Finance, professor of economics. He started his own party because he wants to be the Minister of Finance. He claims that only he can be the Minister of Finance correctly and properly. He wouldn't join any other party because by joining any other party, he probably wouldn't become the Minister of Finance. Not a great chance that he'll get into the Knesset, but he's trying. And this other party, the third party that pops up is Ra'am, Mansour Abbas. Mansour Abbas went together with Ayman Odeh. Ayman Odeh, you can see underneath him. He was part of the Joint Arab List. Interestingly enough, the Joint Arab List got the most seats it ever got in the last elections. I'll get into details about seats in a moment. But Mansour Abbas decided for a number of reasons to break off and create his own party. And so these are just the parties that potentially might get elected. In fact, there are many more parties. They're parties of people that decide that they want X or they want Y, and they'll make their party. And people do vote for them. And the way the Israeli electoral system works is that there are 120 seats in the Knesset. Those 120 seats get divided up between the various parties. They take the total number of people who voted, the total number of votes, divide that total number by 120. Then each one of those 120th becomes one mandate or one Knesset seat. And so therefore, at the end of the elections, the number of people that vote, that is then divided by 120, and you figure out or find out how many votes you need for each seat. A number of years ago, something called the Achuz HaChasima, which is the blockage percentage, was instituted. And that means that you need to get above a certain percentage of the general vote in order to get seats in the Knesset. There's been all kinds of debate as to how that number should be determined. And the number was associated with the smaller parties. And it was decided to bring that number in to avoid many, many splinter small parties. And what's happened is that those three people that you see on top of the heads of the main party leaders are in danger of not crossing that threshold. And there are a few others in the list down below, specifically Meretz of Nitzan Horowitz, which might not cross that threshold. And if we look at it in that sense, you can see that we're talking about an electoral system where people don't necessarily vote for the person, they vote for the party. But interestingly enough, or not so interestingly enough, in this election, it is almost entirely about the person and not about the party ideology. Of course, there are some parties where that's not relevant. One, of course, is United Torah Judaism, the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi party, as well as Shas, the ultra-Orthodox Sephardi party. But even there are all kinds of things that cut through who vote for which party and which person. And what we'll try to do today, I know we don't have that much time to do it, we'll try to run through and see really where did we come from, how did we get here, and really what's going on and how it's evolving and developing. So first we look at this little cartoon. This little cartoon shows Benny Gantz sitting on a diving board. And if you look, the diving board has a date, the 23rd of December, 2020. And there is another plank added onto that diving board, the 5th of January, 2021. Those two dates are the dates by which a budget was supposed to have been introduced and passed by the Israeli government. If you recall, in the last elections, Kachol Lavan, Benny Gantz's party, and Likud, Netanyahu's party, received similar numbers of votes. And the similar numbers of votes that they received basically meant that they had to try and figure out how to work together. And what they did was they tried something which had been initiated a number of times before and actually worked quite successfully. They created something called the National Unity Government. I won't get into the details of the National Unity Government, only to say that the idea of the National Unity Government was to take parties that are vehemently opposed to each other, that are preventing the other large party from creating an overall majority in the Knesset. And in order to make a functional government that could clearly rule the country, these were created. These national unity governments were created. One was created around the Six-Day War, and that was the first time Menachem Begin, the Likud's party, or Cherut, was brought into the Israeli government. Another very famous national unity government was in 1984 with Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Shamir. That survived 4 full years. It lowered Israel's inflation, got Israel out of the main part of Lebanon, was seen as quite successful. There was another national unity government along the way that didn't quite fare as well. And here, this national unity government was seen as a parity national unity government, which meant that everything and every decision had to be made on par with each other. They each got the same number of members in the cabinet, and that meant that they were able to theoretically rule the country. The problem was that every decision had to be made together. The problem also was that the parties didn't see eye to eye on almost anything. In addition to all of that, if you recall, Kachol Lavan was in a package deal with Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid's party before, and they ran together saying that they were not going to join forces with Netanyahu. When the coronavirus broke out and the election results became known, where Likud got 36 votes, Kachol Lavan got 33 votes, the United Arab List got 15 votes, the most ever that it got. Shas got 9, the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi party, Yadut HaTorah, got 7, Avodah Labor Party and Meretz, together with another party, Gesher, got 7, Yisrael Beitenu got 7, Yamina, Naftali Bennett, together with Bezalel Smotrich, only got 6. It became clear that this government had to work and had to solve the coronavirus problem. When they got together, it was all very nice, and it became very clear that all very nice didn't last very long. They started fighting pretty much on almost everything. Along the way, there were the corona rules. Along the way, there was the agreements with the United Arab Emirates and the other countries. Along the way, there was the conflict over the justice system. All of these things led to Gantz and Netanyahu butting heads one time after the next, after the next, after the next. It also led to a situation where the coalition inside the Kachol Lavan party, whose main agenda had been originally just not Bibi, not to have Bibi be elected, basically came apart. And there were people within Kachol Lavan that were fighting in one direction, others pulling in another direction. The Likud was pulling in a third direction and sometimes a fourth direction. Everyone acknowledges and everyone recognizes that Netanyahu is a very, very clever politician. And don't worry, I haven't mentioned and I haven't forgotten the question of Netanyahu's court case. Everyone recognizes that Netanyahu is a very clever politician, and there was great fear that he wouldn't live up to the deal. The Shas leader, Deri, guaranteed that he would live up to the deal. Others guaranteed he would live up to the deal. And so you had a situation where there were these two parties that were literally vying for power, arch enemies. On top of all that was the indictment against the prime minister. And with the indictment against the prime minister and the Justice Department in the hands of Kachol Lavan, it became clear that this parity government that was supposed to work so well together could not, almost could not do anything together. We are known as being the country that did so well with the vaccine, and that is an amazing situation and an amazing thing. However, as far as managing the virus and managing what went on in the country during this past year, everyone in the country recognizes that we were the ultimate definition of a balagan. Now, I just said that, and I should have said at the outset that I'm sure there are going to be things that I say that will disturb some people. But that ultimate definition of a balagan meant that there were closures and openings and openings and closures, and schools that would open and schools that would close. And in the midst of all this, until a government had been formed after the elections, there was a temporary government where Netanyahu, together with the Minister of Health and the Director General of the Ministry of Health, would make the regulations, would make the rules, and things move forward. Once there was a government, once there was responsibility shared by the two parties, in addition, Knesset committees, a variety of questions came up, and a variety of different regulations were proposed, and conflict again ensued. That's by way of introduction. I'm sorry it was a kind of a long introduction, but as a result, we get to that date of the 12th of December, the 23rd of December, which had been delayed already once, and it was extended all the way to the 5th of January. And the government collapsed. With the collapse of the government, the first thing that went was Kachol Lavan. Kachol Lavan started falling apart, and people in Kachol Lavan went from one party to the next. They said they would stay. They ended up going to Yesh Atid. A few went over further to the left. A few went further to the right. A few kind of walked out. And in the midst of all this were the demonstrations against Netanyahu, claiming that Netanyahu could not be the prime minister if he was under indictment. An interesting thing about Israeli law is that if you are a minister in the Israeli government under indictment, you must resign. If you are the prime minister, you don't have to resign. And the reason that law was passed, it was passed because the intention was that if there is an indictment against the prime minister was politically motivated, it wouldn't be that a politically motivated indictment caused the fall of a government. And so using that as a basis, Netanyahu is still in power. Last night was the 32nd, I believe, Saturday night of demonstrations. There were 20,000 people in Paris Square in front of Netanyahu's house. And then in the midst of all this, this cartoon kind of tells a story of Benny Gantz walking without a body. It's just his suit. The two people standing behind him are Nissan with a red tie and Ashkenazi with a blue tie. Nissan, a labor politician who joined Blue and White, Minister of Justice, seen as one of the strongest members of Kachol Lavan of Blue and White. Gabi Ashkenazi, former Chief of Staff, Minister of Foreign Affairs, all very loyal to Benny Gantz. At a certain point, Nissan said he's going off and joining Ron Hulda'i, the mayor of Tel Aviv, to go start a new party. And Gabi Ashkenazi said he's not running in the next election. And more and more people began to fall away. And then, that's Blue and White. Then came the Labor Party. The Labor Party was in a nosedive, in a massive nosedive. And there was a claim in the Labor Party to have a primary vote. That claim in the Labor Party to have a primary vote was challenged by Peretz, who was the head of the Labor Party. He was taken to court. Meirav Michaeli, a journalist turned Labor Party member of Knesset, challenged him and she won the Labor Party primary. Meirav Michaeli is quite an interesting personality in Israeli politics, and she's someone who does not speak in masculine, she speaks in the feminine. So when she addresses crowds, it doesn't matter if it's men and women, she talks to them as if they're women, because as you know, in Hebrew, when you talk in plural, you talk in the masculine. Now that's what this cartoon is about, because her move and her involvement in Israeli politics and her push to use the feminine to show that there is a certain parity, or there should be parity between men and women, has become a major thing. And what do you see in this cartoon? You see three politicians waiting outside of Meirav Michaeli's door, trying to convince her that she should take them to join forces. The one, Bugi Alon had a party named Telem. He was part of Yesh Atid, Telem, and Kachol Lavan. He fizzled, she didn't take him. Ron Hulda'i, I mentioned him before, he started a party, and that party that he started fizzled totally. He was trying. And the third is Ofer Shelach. He started a party. He was number 2 in Yesh Atid. Yair Lapid's number 2 with him from the beginning. He called for primaries. Yesh Atid didn't have primaries. He started his own party. He also continued and not running. And then you come to this picture. This picture shows a totally different story. This is a picture of 6 characters. The 6 characters are Itamar Ben-Gvir in the white shirt and the gray tie, Benjamin Netanyahu in the gray suit, Meir Kahana in a black suit, Bezalel Smotrich in brown clothes, Nitzan Horowitz hanging from a branch, and Meirav Michaeli lying on top. What's this picture about? This picture is about the National Religious Camp and the Labor Party. And we obviously don't have time to get into all the details, I'm trying to show you a few snippets of some of the machinations that are going on. The elections this year are clearly about blocks, not about parties. And the blocks are defined as the right-wing bloc and the left-wing bloc. The claim is that there's a need to get, obviously, 61 in each one of the blocks. The National Religious Party is a party, or the National Religious Camp, or even the right-wing camp, but specifically the National Religious Camp, is a camp that's divided extremely between all kinds of different parties and all kinds of different ideologies. One of the major issues that has come up in this election is a word which has been around for a long time, but here it's become much more significant. And that word is ego. And ego has become so significant that it's been almost impossible to make any kind of combination. And that significance has caused a split both on the right and on the left. What this cartoon shows, it shows the efforts made by Benjamin Netanyahu to take Itamar Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir was the student of Rabbi Meir Kahane. Meir Kahane was a member of Knesset in 1984. He was eventually banned from Knesset because of his ideology, seen as racist ideology. An American who made Aliyah from the Jewish Defense League and then a party called Kach. Itamar Ben-Gvir, very astute, went to law school, became a lawyer, and is a quite successful lawyer and a very successful politician. He's been trying to get into Knesset for a number of years, and the national religious parties have always shunned him, set him aside because they have said Kahanism is racist and it's beyond the realm of the national religious parties. Bezalel Smotrich comes from the heart of national religious Zionism, but he comes from the more, in Hebrew it's called Torani, the more Torah, I don't want to say affiliated, the more ultra-Orthodox Torah part of religious Zionism, came in conflict with the more mainstream religious Zionism and obviously the liberal religious Zionism, was together with Naftali Bennett, with a party called Habayit Yehudi, the Jewish Home, a few elections ago. That party has kind of fallen apart. And the end result is Bezalel Smotrich taking his followers into what he has now called a party called the Religious Zionists, and Naftali Bennett taking his followers into a party which is no longer defined as a national religious party. The concern on Netanyahu's part was that if Itamar Ben-Gvir was in fact running by himself, he would then not cross the threshold. By not crossing the threshold, he would lose votes, seats. That threshold is worth 3 or 4 seats. By so doing, it would weaken Netanyahu's camp and then allow the other camp to rise to power. Netanyahu convinced Smotrich that he must take Itamar Ben-Gvir on his list. Now, to show you how difficult and challenging this situation is, when they signed the agreement, Smotrich didn't publicize it. About 3 weeks later, Itamar Ben-Gvir put out a clip on a Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat, showing Merav Michaeli and number 7 in her party, who is an Arab Israeli woman, liking Hitler. Smotrich announced on Twitter that he didn't sanction that clip and Hitler can't be used in any propaganda. Ben-Gvir said, I have a right to do whatever I want to do. And they are still together in that party. The continuation of this cartoon is Merav Michaeli on top and Nitzan Horowitz down hanging onto the branch. In the latest polls, Nitzan Horowitz has gone possibly underneath the threshold. Merav Michaeli is above the threshold. Her ideological direction is very similar to the Meretz ideological direction. And the concern is that she's lying pretty, knowing that she's got to rebuild her party in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, but she's doing it. And Meretz might be falling down. And then we come to the next direction. The next direction is the Arab parties. The United Arab List was put together 2 elections ago, and it was put together because it was clear that by voting for small parties, they weren't getting very far, and they really succeeded amazingly, both in the last set of elections and in the previous elections before that. A number of months ago, Mansour Abbas, who you see pictured here, the leader of the Islamic Party, Ram, started making moves toward Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, as opposed to the past, started welcoming those moves because he said Mansour Abbas might actually be a good partner. And why was he a good partner? Because Mansour Abbas, in Netanyahu's eyes, and later on by declaration of Mansour Abbas, was putting the social, political, and safety conditions of Arab Israelis above the national concerns of the other parties. His argument was he wasn't putting it over the national concerns, meaning the Palestinians in the West Bank / Judea and Samaria. He was worried about what was going on inside the Israeli Arab community. And only by engaging with power and connecting with power as opposed to opposing power would it be possible to do something and achieve something. His move kind of led to the split away from the large party. And now Mansour Abbas is running on an independent list, not part of the large party. And what do you see in this picture? You see the 2 extremes of Israeli politics. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was latched on to Bezalel Smotrich, and Mansour Abbas, who's latched on to Netanyahu. And Netanyahu's got one arm around Mansour Abbas, one arm around Itamar Ben-Gvir. Considering all of that, you then continue on and you get to a cartoon which is describing what's been going on in the past few days. Gideon Sa'ar, who broke away from Netanyahu, has claimed that he is the true Likudnik. Gideon Sa'ar, the one in glasses, his argument is that I grew up in the Likud, I was successful in Likud, he was number 2 in Likud primaries a number of times, and Netanyahu saw him as a threat and he pushed him aside. Didn't give him a ministership in the last elections or in the ones before that. Sa'ar challenged Netanyahu in a primary election about a year ago. He failed, and then Sa'ar started his own party. Sa'ar is challenging Netanyahu, but Netanyahu is saying that a vote for Sa'ar is basically a vote for Yair Lapid. Because Netanyahu says, I am the representative of the bloc, and anything that doesn't come to me will basically mean you're voting for the other side. Lapid is not responding to Netanyahu. So instead of engaging with Netanyahu, Lapid is just standing quietly. By standing quietly, he's been rising in the polls. He's been moving forward quite a lot in the polls. And what this depicts is Lapid standing there lifting weights, Netanyahu hitting him, and him not responding. This all happened until last night. Last night, Lapid invited Netanyahu to come to a television studio to debate him live, and Lapid and Netanyahu said no. Something else that happened was that Netanyahu theoretically was going to go to Bennett's house, the Yamina leader's house, and have a demonstration outside of Bennett's house on Friday. He sent the Secret Service, Israel's Secret Service, to set up all the security, and Bennett saw it, tweeted, and Netanyahu didn't show up. And so you see what's happening is that there are all these machinations going on between the Arab lists, between the Labour Party, between Sa'ar, between Yamina, Yesh Atid. I haven't even mentioned the ultra-Orthodox parties. And the ultra-Orthodox parties have committed themselves to Netanyahu. And by committing themselves to Netanyahu, Netanyahu then is moving in all kinds of directions in order to help the Haredi parties. And on purpose, I have left the coronavirus till the end. Because what's happened in Israel during the coronavirus is that we've been working on 2 planes. The one plane is recovery, and the other plane is management. The political situation in Israel over the past year has led to management of the coronavirus, where what I'm about to say, I think will be said by almost every party in every place. It has been abysmally disastrous. It's been abysmally disastrous because people haven't known where to go, what to do, what's going on, when are you coming out, who's getting sick, when are they getting sick, do you get tested, do you not get tested? Everything I just said, multiply it by X. The flip side of that is that Israel ordered vaccine way before anybody else. And because of the infrastructure that was established in Israel's health system, the vaccine was given out, and we're in a very, very good place. Put all that together, and you get what people are thinking about during these elections. And what people are thinking about during these elections is definitely Corona. It's Netanyahu's indictment for graft, bribery, and other things. It's Sa'ar, that you see there with the glasses, Sa'ar, who is a very good politician who has very little charisma. It's Lapid, who has the charisma. People are concerned that one, he doesn't have that much experience, and two, he's on the left-hand side of the political spectrum, and we know that the vast majority of the country has been leaning to the right. The flip side that people say about Lapid is that he has shown a lot of experience in what he's done and has learned quite a lot. And so the three people you see standing there potentially could be the three candidates for prime minister, although Sa'ar's numbers have gone down as the polls have continued. And people are either very confused or very adamant about who they're going to vote for. And here you can see a list of 5 polls. They are very, very similar. And the last polls pulled out of here on Friday show Likud with 30 to 32 seats, Yesh Atid 18 seats, Yamina 9 or 10, New Hope 9 or 10. And then if you do the math and try to put it together, the numbers are varying between 59 and 61, 62. A number of issues up for conversation. One, will whoever becomes prime minister rely on the Arab parties for their coalition of 61? Number one, will Bennett join with Netanyahu? He hasn't said he won't. Will Gantz join with Netanyahu? He has said that he won't. Will Sa'ar join with Netanyahu? Probably not. Will absolutely not. Will Yair Lapid join with Sa'ar? Very good chance. Will Yair Lapid join with Bennett? Probably yes. Where is Bennett going to go? And will Smotrich, religious Zionists, be brought into the government? And will Itamar Ben-Gvir become a minister in government, which will be the first time that a Kahanist will become a member of government? These are just some of the issues, some of the questions. And from here, I'd like to take a moment and get a sense from, after all the confusion that I hope I put you in, I'd like to ask Yael Bar-Ilan, who is joining us. She's a tour guide with us, but she's actually working for Yaron Zalicha for the Economic Party. And I've asked her to share a few moments of what it's like to work in a campaign of a party that started from nothing, trying to figure out if they're going to win, what pressures they're under, and how they're going to continue to move forward. Yael, b'vakasha.
Yes, so hi everyone. So basically, the past 2 months, because as you all know, there's no tourism now in Israel, I joined the campaign to Yaron Zalicha, who wants to be the economic minister in the next, let's say, government. Hopefully will get in. What I'm doing actually there is to basically have all the people who actually support in Yaron Zalicha, and because part of the campaign was under Corona, under the COVID virus, most of the action was taken care in the social network, also in a WhatsApp group. So we actually got lots of people in like basic area, and we divide them to like groups, depends which area they came from. I think one of the challenges for a small party is that also the media, you know, all the TV news shows don't take too much serious about the party, because they don't think they like actually get the numbers to get inside the government. In order to be part of the government, of the Knesset, you need to get like 136,000 yeah, am I right, Ezra? 136,000 voices, like people who going to vote. And hopefully Yaron Zalicha and his members hoping to get there. It's really, really hard, because on this election, no one knows exactly what's going to be the results. It's very, very, it's going to be a very tricky election. But in order to join all the rest of the party, they started to bring something else to the politics, the Israeli politics. Most of the members are professors. Yaron Zalicha itself is professor for economic and also psychology, and all the rest of his party who represent his party are professor, and they want to give like the professional idea of the party, not the politics. So I think there are many difficulties because you are a small party. For example, yesterday, Saturday, there was a big news show with all the head of the parties, and because the media don't think that Yaron Zalicha will pass, they didn't invite him to the show. So it's one of the challenges. But let's say from what we hear in the area, from people who, everyone say to him, you need to quit because you're not going to pass, and you are like spending votes to other parties. People who, let's say, don't want Bibi Netanyahu again as a prime minister. Many people are protest against the small parties. So it's kind of like many challenges in order to stay still and say, I think I'm going to pass. Maybe if you have questions, Ezra, and if you want me to emphasize some of the.
So I think we'll move. We can roll it into the questions that people come in, because we have 2 questions already. I would like to say that what's interesting about Zalicha, it's trying to bring in something which really has not been that common in Israeli politics, and that is professional people managing various ministries, as opposed to other countries potentially where you bring in someone who has experience in a specific ministry. You take someone like Yair Lapid, who was made the finance minister when he was the first in Knesset. You take someone like Yair Peretz, who's made the defense minister. I'm not saying whether they were successful or not successful. It's bringing in people that are there because of their political affiliation, not necessarily because of their profession. And that's what Zalicha is trying to do. It'll be very interesting to see what happens, because there's a lot of pressure on him to not do it, and somebody to watch. There's a question here: would any party leader agree under any circumstances with a rotating prime ministership with Netanyahu? So I would imagine the source of that question is that it seems difficult to trust Netanyahu in a rotation, especially after what happened now. And would anybody trust them? The talk, of course, is that no one would go into a rotation agreement. However, you never know. Once the elections are closed, we realize what happens is that people have to go to the president and say to the president, I would like to go with this party. The president then looks and decides. This is really the main thing that the president does. He's got to see who's got the chance for 61 seats. And he then turns to that person who has the chance of putting it together and says, go do it. What'll happen when that happens? Very, very hard to know. People are very wary at the moment. People know Netanyahu has been prime minister for 15 years. He's a very, very clever politician. He's a very, very astute leader. For those people that support him, he is the be all and end all. For those people that don't support him, they recognize how astute he is, how powerful he is, how beneficial he's been for many things. Many of them say time to go. Others say he's under indictment, he has to go. There are a whole variety of things there. but for a beginning politician or even a more astute politician to get into entanglements with Netanyahu is perceived as being very difficult. That's one of the reasons why Sa'ar decided to go out against Netanyahu, because he was seen as one of the only people in the Likud party who could actually potentially do something. What's interesting is the people that Sa'ar has joined on to him, people like Yifat Shasha Biton, who was part of the Likud party, even though she came in from a smaller party called Kulanu, who was the chairman of the Corona Committee, and as chairman of the Corona Committee, challenged decisions of the government. Zev Elkin, who was very, very close to Netanyahu, and as a result of the last elections, was given the role of being the Minister of Water Resources and Higher Education. He obviously took that as somewhat of an insult, broke away, and went with Gideon Sa'ar. So to answer the question, probably not, but you never know. The other question is, other than the two Haredi parties, would any other party leader be willing to accept any guarantees or assurances from Bibi in a coalition government? That's already happened. Specifically, one published today, a very interesting story, is that the Zionist religious party under Smotrich reached an agreement with Likud. And what's the agreement? The agreement is, one, that if either party has extra seats, meaning they reach the number of mandates, the number of seats per mandate, and there are extra votes that don't add up to a mandate, they will swap those votes, meaning either Likud will send their votes to the Zionist religious party or vice versa. That's number one. Number two, Likud promised a space, somewhat realistic space on their list to a member of the religious Zionist party, which means that that person will get into the Knesset under the Likud umbrella, but be actually part of the National Religious Zionist camp. The third is that whatever happens, the religious Zionist camp is dedicated to and committed to functioning entirely in tandem with the Likud. So that agreement has already been reached. And the fifth thing that's come out in the past 2 days is there is a massive campaign that the Likud is going to initiate against Yamina, Naftali Bennett's party, in order to get votes from Yamina, to vote people from Yamina to vote for Likud, thereby lessening Yamina's power, thereby both raising the power of Likud and of the Zionist religious party. And so all of these things are moving around over and over again. There's another question that just came in. What are the chances of any government sitting with a joint Arab list? So that's a very, very good question, because it brings into question a very basic tenet of what Israel is about and what the Israeli political system is about. The Israeli Arab list are basically people who are Israeli citizens. They are fully fledged Israeli citizens with theoretically the right to vote, the right to serve, the right to everything. Traditionally, Arab parties have not been willing to sit with Zionist parties in the government. Having said that, and Zionist parties have not been willing to sit with Arab parties in the government. Having said that, there have been governments where the Arab parties have served as a buffer, which meant that they agreed to vote with the government, but not be part of the government, which gave the government the 61 coalition. So that could definitely happen this time. The question is even more complicated because there's the United Arab List, but there's also Mansour Abbas, who has a relationship with Netanyahu. And all kinds of negotiations above board, beneath the surface, have been taking place between various players of various parties. And one thing going on in the Arab community today is a horrible, horrible situation with violence that has gone beyond comprehension. There are murders in the Arab community almost on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis. There was a double murder just 3 days ago in Kalansawa. It's a horrible situation. The Arab leadership, the Arab Knesset leadership, is at odds with the local city leadership as to what to do. And the Israeli police is trying to stop some of the demonstrations, but the claim is that they're not working hard enough to stop the violence. The flip side of that is the additional element in that is that the claim is that in order to really stop the violence, there is a massive effort needed in education, in cultural training, in all kinds of things like that, and acceptance of Israeli Arabs on a whole bunch of different levels. One of the reasons why Mansour Abbas has moved from the national claim and over to the individual claim of working with local Arabs, Israeli Arabs. And the results of this election will be very, very telling as to how that's going to evolve, both within the Israeli Arab community and what will happen and what will be done with the Israeli Arab joint list vis-a-vis the Palestinians. There's another element here too, and that is the question of the LGBT community. Because on the one hand, the people within the Israeli political spectrum that traditionally have been more supportive of Arabs are the more left-leaning parties, who have also been more supportive of the LGBT community. However, the Israeli Arab community is much more traditional than the Israeli Jewish community. And so when LGBT issues are brought up in Knesset, the United Arab List was split on their votes because they are made up of a very broad extreme on both sides, communists on the one hand, Islamists on the other hand. And so Mansour Abbas was not willing whatsoever in any way, shape, or form to discuss any type of LGBT issue. The party itself wouldn't come out with any statements about it, knowing that any statement, public statement in the Israeli Arab community, except for communists or people that follow some sort of communist ideology or secularists, their opinions would be shunned. And so it's very easy for us to say there is an Israeli Arab community, but we have to realize that just like there is a Jewish community that's divided into so many different little splinters, the Israeli Arab community is divided into so many different little splinters. I spoke to a friend of mine in Fachim who runs a gallery about 2 or 3 months ago when I heard how bad Corona was in Fachim. And I said to him, what's going on in Fachim? And he said, we're horrible. We want to be part of this country, but we're horrible. We go to weddings. We don't distance ourselves. We go out shopping. We don't distance ourselves. We're in a horrible situation. And then I asked him about Mansour Abbas. And he said, yeah, I don't know why he's making such a big deal about the LGBT issue, but it is a big issue. And so there's so many different things. We often tend to put people into categories and say, these are them, this is what they think. But even the them are divided into so many different ways and so many different directions. Any other questions? So before we go, just two other interesting points about what might happen with this election. The election is taking place on Tuesday. By coincidence or not by coincidence, the airport opened up today, meaning Israelis are coming from all kinds of different places to vote. It'll be very interesting to see if that has an effect. There will be voting booths at the airport for people when they come in. There is a very, very strange and interesting phenomenon that's going on, and that is people identifying with the small parties and at the last minute moving on to the big party. And what might the surprises of this election be? One, some people are saying that Benny Gantz is going to get, blue and white, is going to get many, many more votes than the polls say he's going to get. So at the moment he's placed at 5, maybe 6. Some are saying it might go up to 7 or 8. Some are saying that Avigdor Lieberman, Israel Beitenu, might get many, many more votes than polls are saying he's going to get because of his most recent statements, both about Bibi, but even more so about the ultra-Orthodox community. And so just as that poll that I showed you, or the polls that I showed you seem to be very, very similar, there's a very good possibility that we could be in for somewhat of a surprise. And it could be very interesting. It's not going to be like the United States where it's going to take a week or 2 weeks to find out. It's going to be about 24 to 36 hours. They're going to be counting the soldiers' votes afterwards that might change 1 or 2 mandates. They'll be counting what they call the sailors' votes and the diplomatic votes, but we should know probably by Thursday. And I see there's one last question that came in. There is a situation where, we're at the fourth election in 18 months. And the fourth election in 18 months means that people are kind of wary of what's going on. There are hardly any posters up. There are hardly any ads that people are making a big deal about. You have to realize, those of you that have been here for elections 10 years ago, 20 years ago, everybody was focused on the election ads that took place after the news. Now with social media, there are ads everywhere. They still have, because it's mandated by law, they still have the various clips that they have. But that's kind of something of the past. People are going to vote. It's even ironic that Election Day in Israel is a vacation day, and nobody's really talking about the vacation day that will take place on Election Day. It's usually our only Sunday, but that's kind of when it is. And I think there's a great little thing that Rabbi Adam Spilker just put up, and I think it's a very good line, kind of a nice way to end. Like the 4 cups at the Seder, and some say 5, will there be a 5th election? It's a very good question. This gets into a totally other topic, and that's Israel's electoral system. With the Israeli electoral system the way it is, there's a very good chance that there will be another election. It's generally recognized that Israel's electoral system has to change from party lists to partial regional representation and party lists together. There's a plan that's been put forward to raise the number of members of Knesset from 120 to 150, make 50% of those representative geographical representation and 50% list representation. The biggest opponents of that geographical representation is, anybody want to venture a guess? Then I'll raise your hands, is the ultra-Orthodox parties, because they're concerned that if it's a geographical representation, then they're going to lose their electoral power. The argument to that is that there can be gerrymandering, there can be lines drawn, and everything can be balanced. But that's where we stand. So are we going to have a 5th set of elections? The general consensus is there probably will be another election that will come up, maybe within the next year, maybe in the next year and a half. What's very interesting about these elections is that center parties tend to rise up and fall away after 1 or 2 or 3 elections. It happens over and over and over again. The last one to do that obviously was Kahol Lavan. Interestingly, the one party that did not is Yesh Atid. And what's happened is the electoral system was always seen as left-right, Likud Labor. Now it's shifted. And it's not Likud Labor anymore. It's Likud Yesh Atid. And Yesh Atid is not necessarily a left-wing party, although it's put on the left-hand side of the spectrum. Excuse me. And that means that the definitions are changing. And with the definitions changing and potentially newer types of issues arising, hard to tell. One other element in the 5th elections that might come as part of the series is that hopefully, and we all hope, that by the time the next elections come around, Corona will be behind us. And with Corona behind us, there will be other issues that Israel will go back to. And as you all know, there are so many issues that Israel is facing, so many different topics that come into these elections. The major issue now will be Corona, will be Netanyahu's court case, will also be Israel's relationship with the United States, which we haven't addressed. And that's something which still remains to be seen. And so I think on that note, if there aren't any further questions, thank you all for joining, and good luck for all those of you who will be able to vote. It will be, it's a great honor to vote. And I tell everybody who says they don't want to vote that not to vote is like voting against the person that you really wanted to vote for. And so hopefully we'll end up with something a bit more positive after these elections, and we'll be able to continue and move forward.
Thank you, Ezra.
And Chag Sameach to everyone.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Ezra.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Thanks,
Chag
Ez.
Sameach.